an organization of residents of Princeton Borough and Township with diverse backgrounds, interests, and talents. Princeton Future has grown out of a concern that much of the planning and proposed development of the critical downtown spaces have been proceeding in an unconnected manner. The aim of Princeton Future is to assist the municipal authority to take a forward-looking and more comprehensive approach. Investigation and consultation undertaken by Princeton Future indicates that these objectives are achievable with good planning. More detailed studies and further involvement of all concerned parties are, however, clearly called for.
Have a community review of parameters that were established, defined, outlined, I think is probably a better term for this, by the Littwin Street Corridor Studies Advisory Committee. I shared a little bit on February 16th at our evening meeting about what was being considered, and that I did verbally. What we have done since then, we've had another meeting, to look at the structure as well as the content of those parameters. Now, the parameters as originally constructed were to guide the design process, which is something that's in progress. It's not been concluded, and it is in bubble diagram form, as Michael will share with you later. It is not a preconceived list. It was discussed within the context of the discussions of Witherspoon Street first and foremost, since that's what the study is about. But it recognized in both the timing, the urgency, and the recent progress and reports of the hospital, its decisions, as well as the report from the Healthcare Task Force as to their recommendations. And so it is recognizing that as we looked at the north section of the street retail, that the central section was going to have additional look at this site as a specific property, in addition to all of the street issues as well as the neighboring land uses. What this is before you is, the first page is an introduction, and you'll see as I move from the paper to the screen, in the course of even this last drafting, which was Wednesday, yesterday, the advisory committee, those who received it by email, I must say there were a couple that didn't seem to get the attachment, but and Hendricks, I think you were one. Did you get it? You didn't. And neither did Chuck Alden. I don't know if you, yeah, but others did, so I'm a little puzzled by that. And I tried to re-forward it to you, but I got it on some paper here, but then you will also be involved in this process. And I will incorporate everyone's comments at this point. It begins with an introduction, and then it lists 6 Roman numeral areas of concern. I'm going to try to move to the screen. Okay. And just go to the introduction. Very similar. I don't think much really has changed in the first paragraph. If you have read it, since you have it on paper already, I don't know if I need to read it aloud, but I will. For the tape. The principles outlined below have been gathered from numerous meetings and public working sessions attended by a broad spectrum of the Princeton community. I'd say that's pretty accurate, would you? Princeton Future has facilitated these meetings and a smaller group volunteered to consolidate ideas and put them into the form of a set of parameters. There are editorial changes that I will insert, as I know that they were made, but aren't reflected here. This advisory committee held additional meetings to analyze details of the site, zoning, design, and development options. With the concurrence of the community, we hope that these parameters will be considered seriously by all parties who hold authority and an interest in the future of our community. Any discussion about that paragraph? And because what I hope to do through this review of these items is to incorporate, or first of all, get feedback. I'm sure the advisory committee is very anxious to hear comments. And to point out if anything has been left out. Just as a note, they were developed by using all of the comments in the 4 meetings that preceded the advisory committee meetings. Yes, Mr. Floyd.
Just a question, the definition of community as applied in the statement, is that narrowly geographically community, or is that the community of Princeton?
That's the community of Princeton.
I would hope that maybe some way we could insert that in something final.
We sort of, we have sort of a hierarchy of sort of local, surrounding neighborhoods. You know, there are very distinct
I understand that, but this affects the entire Princeton.
Okay, so maybe we need to comma that and what that actually means. Thank you. Yes, John.
And a thought that maybe should be discussed further, the concurrence of the community. How do we get beyond this room and the groups of people who are coming here? I don't know. I don't remember discussions. Are we putting it in the paper? Are we expecting letters, etc.? So I guess that's a question.
Exactly. That's one of the important things. The next paragraph. The hospital site on Witherspoon Street, as well as other hospital-owned properties, has evolved in service to the host community for over 75 years. The needs of the general public have been well served in the current locations of the hospital. Growth within the hospital's market area, trends in medical service delivery, and the desire for growth potential are all medical center needs that may well exceed the capacity of the Princeton community to provide or endure. It is time to reconsider the needs of the community and the use of the hospital properties for the greatest benefit and service to the citizens of Princeton. Here, I guess there is a distinction when others may use community, particularly when the hospital references community in the sense and definition of their market, which is Princeton and a few other towns, okay, and that this is very specific to say this is for Princeton, which, if you don't know, is the township and the borough, okay? I'm sorry, was there any further comment on the content?
Make a comment which is going to be unpopular, but let me make it anyhow. It's a wonderful piece of property. I think as Bob Geddes pointed out the other day, we don't own it. The people that own that piece of property have, in a mailing that I got yesterday, indicated that they need to make money by selling it for what they call appropriate development. And if you do a back-of-the-envelope calculation, that means that they want to end up getting something of the order of $700,000 to $1 million an acre for the piece of property that we'll just call hospital, it being a separate issue.
Well, let's start with appropriate development.
Well,
we throw in the numbers.
But I mean, all I'm trying to, the point I'm trying to make is that I think that there's truth in what you said there, but it has to be counterbalanced against a truth that somebody else sees in terms of their needs for continuing to provide to the Princeton community and the surrounding areas a modern, appropriate medical center. And
Somewhere
I just think
else,
we have
in
to be
another
aware
location.
of that.
Yeah,
If not, we deceive ourselves.
I understand that perspective. Yes.
I'm Mary Ellen Marino. I haven't been party to all of these negotiations, so I'm hesitant. What? Not negotiations. Whatever. Discussions. I would counter, not counter. I mean, you're putting out a truth. It's a truth. The hospital wants the most they can possibly get out of this. On the other hand, if we are speaking as citizens and therefore potential policymakers for the political units of Princeton Borough and Princeton Township, then we can establish by our zoning and adjustment requirements what it is we think should be there if they feel that they need to go. And that could affect their price of their property, or should. Well,
It's also instructive in the way we have come to frame that citizen response. That piece of property has been a tax-free property for 85 years in trust for use by the community.
No, it hasn't been for 85 years.
Many
Zoning
years.
variances consume properties that were tax-paying properties.
Oh, right. No,
So
the whole
don't
thing.
say it's been there for 85 years in that context.
Good, okay.
Wrong if you. Yeah, just
Thank
one,
you.
Jan, and I certainly don't want to, all of you got this document.
In the mail, yes.
Yes, and I
Yesterday.
think really what
I
you're
did.
talking about is precisely what's stated, they can hear me, precisely what's stated in the last sentence on the first page. And that's where we either become conspiratorial or we objective. And it says, identifying and securing desirable zoning is key to the success of our plan to sell the existing property or existing site. And it kind of sounds like it started out, and I don't want to really take this too long, it started out, as all of you know, through a series of zoning and planning variances that allowed the hospital to do that expansion.
Right.
And it's kind of strange that here we sit and we're now going to find a way to enhance the beneficiary of something that was detrimental to the community.
That was my point.
Okay, thank you. Once you and I are on the same page.
Yeah, we're on the same page on that one.
And we have some text further on, supplied by one of our advisory committee members, that says just that. Let's go into the next paragraph. Oh, I'm sorry, Hendricks, are you?
He
Okay.
wants to keep it moving.
Yes, okay. The community meetings revealed and elevated concerns about the social, environmental, and economic fragility of the street and adjacent neighborhoods. Our preliminary work suggests that it is appropriate at this time to present guiding principles for the future of Witherspoon Street in the presence of and absent the hospital. We recognize the benefit of several community meetings held by the hospital over the past 2 years and the recent report of the Healthcare Task Force. The following parameters for redevelopment of the hospital site are offered to establish a framework for discussion and planning for Witherspoon Street, the adjacent neighborhoods, and the community. That is the introduction. Now we'll go on into the Roman numeral sections, and you'll see just that point that Mr. Floyd was making. It's been expanded from your printed version.
The decision by the hospital to relocate, which I think has been made, based on the fact that they can find parameters or they can find a site that will take them, or whatever decisions the hospital has to make. This is based on the hospital plan. I think we need to consider what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years with the hospital staying.
Well, that's what the previous paragraph,
Well, there
It's saying.
there
And the
are
presence of-
considerations under today and concessions under
That's
consideration today that will greatly affect what goes on for example, if the town fathers decide to make a variance to allow 35,000 square feet additional space, what does that mean for us in the next 3 to 5 years? And what does that mean, what's going to happen to those buildings when the hospital does vacate? I mean, we're looking at a future after the hospital. I'm concerned about the next 3 to 5 years with what they're going to do.
Exactly. That's why this last line does not just jump to the future, but it recognizes the present condition as well. The hospital site must be considered within the context of the local neighborhoods and community. The current density of development, height, bulk, square footage, FAR, etc., on the site is the result of concessions and accommodations given to the hospital. The current limits would not have been given or approved for any other occupant of the site that was identified as a special need and use. Therefore, both municipalities should ensure that redevelopment of the site is done at a greatly reduced density, including more compatible building heights, FAR, bulk, square footage, etc. Any comment?
Comment, yeah, I of course agree with it.
Because Mike wrote it.
But I think just dovetailing off the comment that was just made next to me, this interim period, it's absolutely frightening that the healthcare task force is considering additional accommodations and negative concessions that'll have a negative impact on the neighborhood.
I think it'll have a permanent impact on the neighborhood.
Yes.
Don? Okay. Is there any chance that we can convince the hospital not to leave?
Not to move.
I think that
Well, I mean, not
train has
convince.
left the station.
Well, yes, we think so. I don't know. I mean, I
But-
think the hospital,
The task force did very little, in fact. It suggested 3 scenarios that might be lived out, and said that the planning board and the 2 municipal governments, the people who have to make decisions, have got to take these situations into account. One of the things which the hospital thinks is implausible because it doesn't see it taking it far enough into the future is that the activity could indeed stay on an expanded version of the current site. And that has got some stuff. The other one is exactly what they want to do, that they move away and this piece of stuff still stays there. And then essentially there are 2 scenarios. If somebody came in and wanted to put another hospital there, the zoning runs with the property, not with the owner, and it's zoned for hospital, doesn't need to be any change. The most important thing, where the inputs to the planning board and so on need to be made, is that they do indeed move out because they can get what they need in terms of financial things, and then that land does become available for other uses. But one of the hidden evils, if you like to look at it that way, in what has been stated, and you need to counter that if you disagree with it, is that there is a grandfather clause associated with existing buildings. So if they're used for something on that site, but the building is retained, then that's a use that is countenanced as being a permissible use with the same footprint. So there's a lot of real important issues from a town planning viewpoint included there. But I don't think, and in terms of let me just make a final comment, in terms of the immediate expansion of the hospital, that was conceived, I think, by the task force as something that is necessary if the hospital is to function for the next 2 or 3 years. And if that doesn't happen, then they will move out in a different way.
No, that's Professor Royce, who's chair of the Borough Zoning Board.
To do for that short term requires zoning variances?
Yes.
Okay, then.
It
all
requires
of
an action by the municipal
8,000
government.
of us maybe
in
need
fact.
to speak up about
It's
it.
not a spot zoning that it suggested that it is worked through by the government.
But zoning variances are subject to public reaction and voices.
All of this
Of
stuff
course,
is
yeah,
subject to
right.
public reaction and voices, that's why we're here.
Right.
Have they
Yeah, but
pers-
that's, you know, when it comes to the.
Have is, has the hospital proceeded with its request to the planning board for this additional 35,000 square feet? And does anyone know, anyone here from the hospital that can speak to that and what the need is? I guess not. It seems to me that 6 years is a very short period of time in some ways. And again, I can't tell the hospital how to do its planning, but it must be a very critical need that they have to invest so much money into this 35,000 square feet, and then a few years later to leave. So I think I'm not supporting that at all. I think it's, you know, I would be looking at that very carefully if I were the board of trustees of the hospital, the expenditure of that sort of resource. But I just think it doesn't sort of hold with their desire to actually relocate the whole operation, and perhaps a better use of that resource would be to settle on the site that they're going to purchase and then build that, whatever it is, that piece of the operation there. The other thing that I would say is that I don't think any of this really should be predicated upon the hospital's need to generate capital on the sale of that property. Number one. And number two, it really is the responsibility of the planning board and the municipal governments to determine how that site is rezoned. And the primary consideration should not be the hospital's need to generate capital. It should be a consideration of what the basic needs of the entire community are, and that should be the very primary consideration.
The hospital hasn't asked for these accommodations,
Yeah.
but yet the task force in recommendation 2 makes a definite statement: the regional planning board and borough council should expedite amendments to applicable zoning restraints to accommodate the short-term needs. So you're already saying that we should have it, and they haven't even asked for it. What about the neighborhoods?
I think, actually, you've probably had a chance to read through it, there is a cumulative effect to items 1 through 6, that it's important, I think, that we go through the whole thing. So let's keep.
Let's try to do it.
All right.
Next one is very short, simple but complex, because I think this probably still needs a few changes to the wording, but it essentially reads, at all hospital properties, only full tax-paying uses should be considered and no payment in lieu of taxes, and that's a pilot, negotiated.
May
I
I
think-
ask one question there?
Yes.
Would that imply then that the university could not be a part of some acquisition, or?
Well, this is where it probably needs more definition. It's not the use necessarily, or the use is not the only aspect of taxation, it's the owner's status. And the owner's status, in the case of the university, on many properties exempts them as well as the uses. So this statement could
All I'm
exempt.
asking is, would that preclude the university?
It could exempt, right, it could
If they
preclude,
could.
but it could also preclude things that we may not want to have precluded, because when you say not full tax-paying uses, well, we're talking about property taxes here. We're not talking about their necessarily the tax status. It could be a daycare center that's run by a nonprofit. So we have to, I think, clarify, because that was not quite the intent to,
Says no tax, no tax.
Yes, but it's not the uses necessarily in all cases. It may be the entity as well as the use that that entity may
I think
provide.
Ibushi wants that one long enough.
Well, I wanted it to be discussed because it seemed to have been so short and simple that in further analysis, it's not that short and simple. If what you're saying, because this is part of your pleasure, no, or anyone, if it's believed, regardless of a university proposal for use, if that is not desirable, then that needs to be stated, because that could be, either housing or other uses, and housing happens to, when you go further down, fit under the preferred use for the site. Yes, Karen, is that you back?
In the context of university uses, we typically, we being the university, pay full taxes, not payments in lieu of taxes, on other than undergraduate dormitories, housing that is used for anything but undergraduate dormitories. And so I think you're right. I think it's not necessarily the entity that's the owner that is what you're trying to address, I think. It's the use should be a use, whomever owns it for whatever use, that owner, on the basis of that use, contributes to property tax rolls. I also think I'm a little uncomfortable just on a different level with the no payments in lieu of taxes, because I think you might, as you just suggested, eliminate some uses and some owners who might be enormously beneficial to the community, whether it's a nonprofit organization that runs a daycare center or some of the nonprofit other service providers you might want to see. Being quite that explicit about it may preclude their opportunities.
Right. I'm looking for suggested rewording that expresses the scenarios as well as preferences to put forth on the site versus trying to list those.
I had a
eliminate.
question, the borough or township can answer this. Are those properties that the university pays full taxes on the tax rolls as a matter of law? They're, and they will continue to be on the tax rolls. That's good. The other thing that I was going to say is that I believe some colleges or universities have the capacity to develop properties that do produce ratables. Some universities actually engage in a process of community development with communities that produce a range of housing options for people who are not necessarily a part of the university community. So it is conceivable that a college or a university, whether it's Princeton or someone else, might engage in such a development initiative with the community, if it's so desired, or if that was a part of its mission. I don't know if that's something that Princeton University intends to do, but or has the vision to do, but it is conceivable.
This is the time to establish the community's vision for what it might be. I mean, who would develop to the vision? It'd be various people and take various implementation processes.
Right.
So,
I think as you go along,
at
least from what I've seen here, there's an indication that there's a broad desire for the property to be developed comprehensively, and with it being an integrated part of the neighborhood and the community. So not just one particular use is allowed for, or one particular use is disallowed.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I'm not really sure how to craft the language on this, so I'll just throw out the idea. You know, my concern is, stems from a little bit what I've read in these recommendations. I would concur very much with what was said previously about 35,000. That sounds like it was whose hat was that pulled out of? And I just want to say that I was at the recent planning board meeting where Marvin Reed made his presentation and seemed to indicate that they might need this for a little, you know, fix-up project here, another little fix-up project there over the next 5 years, but $35,000 is a gigantic fix-up project. And is, in case, you know, probably a lot of people in this room know, is about 35,000 square feet, is about the size of that office building on the corner of Witherspoon and Henry. That's about 31,000 square feet. That's a rather significant addition to that site. So just wanted to throw that out there so people have a mental picture of what 35,000 square feet is. And once you give them that 35,000, they're not obligated to do it in little teeny pieces. They can take that 35,000 and just do whatever they want with it, you know? I don't know where they're gonna put it on that site,
Not the way
but,
you get 35,000.
but, okay. But onto this tax situation, there's another recommendation, which is also sort of, I think, making everybody think about the whole tax situation, and that is that many times developers are given some kind of a break tax-wise in order to increase their profits, and quite frankly, if we look at what our municipal budgets are all about and what the most significant portion of that budget is about, it's the public schools in Princeton. And so what I think is that we do need to have language that somehow limits that kind of profiteering at the expense of our children.
Calling for full tax payment for what's on the hospital property, you are going in the direction of giving the hospital this big dollar value. But it contradicts what you're saying when you say you don't want it to be as high as it was. And you said there is a preference in the zoning to allow adaptive use of a building as is, so there's a lot of contradictions.
Okay. Let's go on to the next one. And I think it too has changed a bit, but all uses should be primarily residential. Planning must focus on the following considerations. We've accepted that as first of all, a recommendation from many of the community meetings that were held. So the first line is the general, and these are some of the detail issues that we've just talked about. Provision for a variety of residential types, unit sizes, and resident populations. Any commercial or public accommodations are to be in service to and supported by the surrounding neighborhoods and local community. And those, they're examples of a small convenience store, daycare center, service-based nonprofit, team, community center, or just some of them. Mixed-use concepts should not result solely from a calculation or percentage formula, should not be applied site-wide, and must not undermine the residential quality of the street. And perhaps should be added area. For example, the 60-40 residential commercial zones that are on Witherspoon Street, the RB zone in the borough, for example, that allows 60% residential, 40% commercial, where all the first floor spaces are commercial or could become commercial. That's undesirable. The RB zone could essentially result in that kind of redevelopment, so that it causes us to even think back to, while it's acceptable and there are conditions that should be preserved, there now maybe the zoning, even in RB definitions, are not necessarily what would ensure that preservation of the use as residential would continue. The example was offered by one of the advisory committee members that if the zone or the Witherspoon Street, as well as the hospital entire site, was given that kind of zoning, it could essentially be another Palmer Square. and that it was not exactly the picture of what people were looking at. Next, protection and preservation of adjacent residences, the affordable housing stock, and the residents and units represented by the Borough Housing Authority units on Franklin Avenue specifically.
Can I make a comment on,
Certainly.
I think, C and D in a sense? I believe that as undesirable as a 60-40 split in the borough might be, it's very important for people thinking about this space to look at the fact that Witherspoon Street north of the borough line is commercial. And as of right, people can in principle come in and develop commercial space there. Now, what happens on the hospital side will have an influence on the nature of the development that might come in. But I certainly think that if you're going to talk to the planning board seriously at this point, you need to worry about that aspect of things.
That's certainly why this is a street or corridor study and not just the hospital
right.
site.
But that doesn't
Right.
imply that.
Well, we've done work and had meetings on Witherspoon Street North that resulted in some recommendations around the commercial nature of that section of the street. So yes, you're absolutely right. Any other wrong with this? I can work with this. Now, what we need to understand is that because the whole point is to try to come to a consensus so that the study can be further directed in its design and implementation strategy responses to community wishes. Sort of like the running rules. And so I guess since I've stated that, Heidi has said, well, please give the mic to Heidi.
Try not to elongate this process, but I do want to respond to what Barry said, because I do live down at that end, at North End. And what's interesting is that there's all kinds of zoning in place that gives you certain percentages, right? Then what you have to do is go out and look at what is really there right now, and how does that compare to what's on paper? And that's one of the things that's real interesting, probably not just about Princeton, is that the zoning that's on paper is not necessarily what actually exists in space. And what people understand to be their city, their town, their spaces, is what exists, not what's on paper. That's just like something imaginary to people. People don't think about Princeton of what it could be. They think about Princeton about what it is. I mean, that's what they see every day. And so although there's areas that are zoned business, people don't necessarily recognize that as, completely business. And there's still quite a residential feel even down at that north end. And I know that there are businesses there that are pressuring to have it, more and more commercial. We also have a public school down at that end. So, my feeling is that, we do need to look at that carefully. We actually need to reinforce the residential use end of that area and not let it become overwhelmed by business and commercial uses. So I feel very strongly about that.
We have, I think again, that all of us are catching up to one of the purposes of every meeting is to bring things into concordance. That has clearly come out in our meetings and is already on the recommendations that reality of the kind of character of that end of the street, if in fact would be totally changed if the zoning were actually implemented.
Right.
And so we have recommended and would like to carry through on that in the sense that even either, depending on how far we can go with the study, recommend the exact language that the zoning should go forward with, and a recommendation of the language, or at least that it be changed in relation to exactly what you just said. That what we are hearing, I think, up and down the street, and why this is in context of that of what we've heard is that the hospital is key to what would happen either walking from here to the hospital or walking from the hospital to the school, and that we want to maintain that as residential.
It means that we will recommend, I think, changes in zoning in just about every zone along Witherspoon Street to adjust to the real meaning of what you're talking about. About the C, I might suggest that we somehow clarify that it means that what happens along Witherspoon Street is different in zoning from what happens along Henry, and in the middle of the site it's maybe a little different yet. So maybe somehow we can overlay that concept with the concern for the mixed use.
Right, these are the initial drafting of parameters that will have greater detail, both written and graphically, so that this will all become very clear. Let's go on to the next one. Section 4. Plans should facilitate flexible site arrangements, multiple parcel configurations, and different developer opportunities. I think it was stated at one of the first or second workshops was that the site does not have to remain in its current form and could very well have different types of development and developer opportunities. The objectives, policies, and implementation tools should encourage and facilitate diversity. Site options must be considered within the context and character of surrounding area and its current zoning. And maybe there's a little discussion around the current zoning and its conditions in the interest of both the community and property owners. Area context and zoning in terms of separate parcels and in the aggregate must be considered. Again, to that point made by Heidi and others on what is actually there and how individual parcels impact the area. Any comments on this? Yes, Mr. Clark.
Is this kind of a philosophical codification of the reasonable expectancy of what will come out for that zone, and now let me be sacrilegious, or is this, could this be applied any place from the standpoint of zoning, Library Place, other places in town, conceptually?
It could, when you're talking about assembling parcels for development and how zoning then would impact that assemblage, and then how the physical form and use would be impacting the area. It could end up, if you assemble a few properties on Witherspoon Street, you could build one big
No,
building.
I'm on Library Place now.
Oh, well, go on to Library.
All I'm
Yes.
saying is, philosophically, is this an overview that will be applicable? Thank you, Heidi. And I'm asking the others, though, who may not agree with you, but I think that part of the zoning philosophy, the task forces, the planning, I'm wondering if this is an overlay that's applicable to all.
Certainly could be.
Sure.
Good, because we keep referring, and Yana keeps coming back to Witherspoon Street, that's all. I would just like to have it understood that there may be some advocates for this kind of a philosophy, which is a good philosophy. I'm not questioning the merits of it, being the overlaying philosophy throughout the Princeton. Thank you.
Very good.
I know
Library Place, because the zoning and the uses and the lack of variances,
And interest.
it's all consistent there. It's on Witherspoon Street where many zoning boards have let many things go contrary to what the character of the neighborhood is or was. And for instance, why across from Community Park, as people are saying, is its own business. It was probably zoned for some particular institution, hoping that they would expand down there. But that doesn't happen on Library Place.
Well, that's where
And we
Christ
didn't
of the
practice
mission.
that, that's my son.
I'm going to agree with Mr. Floyd. I think that
Which one?
Which one?
both. But my concern goes back to what currently is happening. What Heidi said is what is really reality. All these words sound great, and I would love to see it as a general policy within Princeton. But if you walk Witherspoon Street, you see massive changes going on today, or even subtle changes going on today, that are going to change the complete nature of Witherspoon Street if it is not stopped and stopped soon and looked at as a complete and thorough plan.
Point that the language here is very much like master plan language. And
Wow.
that's, I think, a very good thing. So it does speak to the philosophy, the overlying philosophy that we're being encouraged as a community to really reflect on. And I hope that this reflection is in service to the planning board and the master plan subcommittee and the zoning board and all of us. So I think it's a good process, and the language is resonating in that way for me.
The city should establish the preferred standard for street reconstruction, land use policy, and development along Witherspoon Street. The pattern and scale of development should be considered in terms of a small town setting. This is now becoming a little more specific. For example, hotels, malls, office complexes, and CCRCs, which stands for Continuing Care Retirement Communities, are developed in economies of scale that are larger and inappropriate for this site. So there's that word appropriate. Who defines appropriate in this case? And I think we might have the hospital talking about their definition of appropriateness that may not necessarily be the communities. Incorporate open public green space in all options, and develop the southwest corner of the hospital site, and that's Franklin and Witherspoon, as an important public space. This could be external as well as in a structure, as a resource and asset for the residents, the surrounding neighborhoods, and community. The distinguishing factor in that is that we're not talking about a regional facility. When you step out of the community, you're going into a market, then the area could not bear the burden or the impacts of. But you guys talk about this. I see you shaking your head. Give Jean the mic. It sounds good. Have I lulled you all to sleep to the point?
Yeah. This is not C. Why are we being so specific on C? I mean, I don't really understand why we're designing the site here.
On C?
Yeah.
Well, we're being specific about an intersection, an area of the site that had both significance to the surrounding neighborhoods, the circulation. A lot of problems had been identified about that particular zone of the site and how it might be further used. And it's along Witherspoon Street as well. It's not
That's
just
a piece of municipal property, isn't it?
that corner.
Municipal
No,
housing.
Are you talking about the house?
no.
The main-
Sorry, the hospital sites. On the hospital side.
On the hospital side,
Okay,
so
yes.
it's on the north side of that.
Yeah, well, I guess my point is there are, in general, if you're talking master planish things, this should be, say, a goal that there should be public green space, but it shouldn't necessarily be specified
public
where it
space.
is.
Well, there are public facilities in the master plan as
Okay,
well.
but you could make the argument that it should be something which draws people into the site from the community park school direction. You can make the argument that that there's plenty of green
That's the
space
part,
on
yeah.
the side facing the community housing and the cemetery.
What if we
It is
said,
different, you're right, Gene, but it is.
develop
it's
an
more public
important, just say,
facility.
develop an important public space along the Witherspoon Street?
Yeah.
Integrated with overall development.
Right, so
I
it's
think the
not-
integration is the
It
important.
turns out having tried some different, having tried some different design configurations, and Joanna
has too, that it wouldn't necessarily have to go on this corner. And so,
Well, I think that Advisory Committee will have, it should talk about that.
okay, but we could do it in terms, that might be something to discuss in terms of the designs, but it could say here, just like B does not say where to put the green space. Develop an important public space along Witherspoon Street, and then wherever it actually works out best in each scheme.
But when you look at the elements of the master plan, there is an open space, but there are other elements that this may address. This is not necessarily open space, that's why it's pulled away from open space, but may be more of a public facility. So
I agree with that.
So that's where.
We should have both C and D.
Then there's specific locations that are often cited, or areas or zones, so but it can be, that's something that's further,
But
can be
I think,
accommodated as well.
but I think what we all are aiming for is integration, sort of comprehensive vision for the site, and therefore being specific about one thing goes against that vision, because the green space and the public, whatever, inside or outside, how they fits with everything else, we don't know yet. But we want to say it's important and it should be there, and it should be not on Henry Street, maybe we
Yeah,
want
not
to
on
say
the
that,
northeast border.
but on the Witherspoon Street,
Right.
probably.
Right,
So it's
okay.
the integration, I think, is the most important after having those things.
Okay, so less specificity is requested in this particular section.
The humorous and landscaper challenge answer to Jean's question is, because that's where the better light is. So,
Very good.
It's a friendly
Hendrik.
corner.
we try to keep it a little.
There are locational attributes that have to be, considered. I'm getting a lot from the right side of the aisle here. What's coming on this side? No, okay.
Only in location, we're probably the left side when it comes to.
Right, no, I'm looking at it this way, but I know. Okay, let's go on to the rest, we're almost finished. This is the last one, where there is specificity, I must say, and it's not general master plan kind of planning. Planning of hospital property.